You know who was a major enabler of reckless driving? The Baal Shem Tov. He had this thing that every Saturday night, he would head out with a number of his students and their wagon driver, Alexei. And it either was a product of Alexei being drunk or sleepy or generally negligent, that Alexei would just release the reins of the horses and the wagon would take them wherever they somehow needed to go. There was always a story to experience with the Baal Shem Tov or a lesson to be learned. Well, except for this one time, sure enough, the Baal Shem Tov traveled with 3 of his students. They all happened to be named David, and this wagon driver, Alexei. Alexei releases the reins, but for some reason, the purpose of their trip does not clarify itself in the usual short time. The students begin getting concerned that perhaps the magic has worn off for tonight. Even more concerningly, the Baal Shem Tov, who usually is constantly meditative and probing during these trips, seems kind of out of it. He seems out of his regular character of being a profound leader. He kind of just seems like a regular guy for this trip. And the hours go on and on and on, and sure enough, they come to the conclusion this time that they're absolutely lost. At this point, they're deep in the woods. There is no light besides for daylight, so traveling has to stop once the sun sets. And it appears they brought enough food to survive, but they are quite lost, so lost that before they knew it, it was almost Shabbat again. Now this was a problem because to survive out of a wagon was one thing, but to celebrate a Shabbat out of a wagon would be close to impossible. So they were desperately seeking even a simple accommodation. Sure enough, as the sun is setting, they see in the distance one hut. Tiny hut, and they say, oh, okay, you know, we're back in business. The Baal Shem Tov has worked a miracle. He'll be back to himself pretty soon. We could expect some profound lesson or a major reason why we had to go so far. As they approach the hut, they're comforted with the fact that indeed there's a mezuzah on the door, and it looks like this hut is owned by a Jewish person. But after knocking on the door, they're immediately met with yelps and screams and general rudeness. The guy that opens the door looks disheveled, drunk, and generally disrespectful. He takes one glance at their Chassidic frocks and he yells, I hate Chassidim. My father hated Chassidim. My grandfather hated Chassidim. Get out of my house. Surprised, the Baal Shem Tov students say, okay, if you have a house here, then there must be a town nearby. Direct us to the town nearby. It's getting close to Shabbat. The man starts laughing. He says, the nearest civilization will have you arriving on Tuesday. There's no way you get there before Shabbat. So then they realize they have no choice. They begin begging him. Apparently, it seemed that he had an inn of sorts. So they say, please, we'll pay more money. We'll pay double. We'll pay triple. We just need a place for Shabbat. Finally, after begging him, he agrees and allows them in. But he says it's on condition that you keep the following 3 criteria. First of all, no praying with song. He knew that the Hasidim were well known for their meditative prayers, and he claims that he has all of these Gentiles coming to his tavern to purchase liquor, and he doesn't want the Gentiles to be weirded out, so no singing whatsoever. You have to pray silently. Next, you cannot pray at length. All the prayers of the day, he says, have to be done at my speed. And third of all, I don't want any tricks. I don't want you to take walks during Shabbat and pray outdoors with song and at your own speed. I want you to partake in all of the Shabbat meals with me. And there are no exceptions. So the Baal Shem Tov and his students, they see they have no choice, so they agree. Walking in, they see a disgusting sight. The place is a mess. There's empty bottles of liquor everywhere. There seems to be no furniture. The only thing that they have is a makeshift table, which is like an old piece of plywood or a board lying on a couple of mounds of dirt on the ground, and that's it. The rooms are completely empty, filled with trash. After such an entrance, their illusion that this house would somehow provide a poetic ending was completely dispelled. The sun sets and Shabbat starts. They see this guy just muttering to himself, saying how much he dislikes the Hasidim. He begins to pray, and his prayer is one big mumble jumble without any focus on the words. And of course, they kept their word that their davening would not go longer than his. They joined him for the meal, and as he's starting his Kiddush, he mumbles his way through Kiddush. They barely get a chance to respond Amen. He makes Kiddush on vodka instead of wine, and he barely leaves any liquid for them to drink from his Kiddush cup. There's a few drops of vodka on the bottom that he gives them to drink. Then the meal comes around, and all there is some crusty, old, moldy black bread. And even at that, this disheveled, dirty man points to them and says, you guys are too filthy to touch my bread. Here, let me cut you small pieces, and that's the only bread you're allowed to touch. You guys are disgusting. Let's just say this man did not possess Hoosier hospitality. Finally, Shabbat ends, and again, it's too dark for them to travel at night, so they figured they'll wait till early in the morning and then kind of sneak out of the home. But that next morning, they try the door and it's locked. They ask him, what's the story? Why is it locked? I thought you wanted to get rid of us. And he said, no, I already made you breakfast, and I don't want the breakfast to go to waste. So they say, please, we'll pay you for your breakfast. Just let us go on our way. So he says, no, you think it's all about the money. It's not about the money. I don't waste food. See, you Hasidim are so untrustworthy. You're generally terrible people. So they say, okay. They knew that the threat of violence was very much hovering around this man. But then breakfast started looking like it's going to be served as brunch, and then brunch became lunch, and before they knew it, I guess it was during the winter, it's getting dark already. So they had no choice but to stay another night. Next morning, same thing, locked. And this schedule went on until Wednesday. Comes Wednesday, they're trying to leave, and they're begging him, please, we have to go. We need to find someplace outside of your home. At this point, they think that they're prisoners, perhaps. As they're begging, suddenly out walks an elegant woman who seems sophisticated and proper. She introduces herself as this man's wife. Now they're in total shock. The chasm between this boorish man and this elegant woman was huge. She looks at the Baal Shem Tov and she says, Rebbe, please stay with us for another Shabbat. So now even the Baal Shem Tov was quite confused. And he says, first of all, why would we stay for another Shabbat? You guys didn't want us and treated us poorly. And second of all, how did you know I'm a Rebbe? I'm not feeling very Rebbe right now. So she says, Rebbe, you don't remember me? So he says, no, I don't remember you. So she says, I was an orphan child. And out of the goodness of your heart, besides for being a great Rebbe, you personally adopted me and took care of me until I was old enough to fend for myself. And for that, I am ever grateful. But there was this one time that I must talk to you about. I'm not a dermatologist, but apparently at the time there was some skin affliction which needed to be scraped off. So this woman is telling the Baal Shem Tov and his students, I had this affliction. And the Baal Shem Tov's wife would do the scraping process, and it was often very painful. So once while she was scraping, the Baal Shem Tov was studying Torah or meditating, and I felt a lot of pain. So I screamed out in pain, and the Baal Shem Tov, who was jarred by the noise, had a human reaction and yelled at me for interrupting him. But at the time, I was so embarrassed that you yelled at me in front of the entire household that I made a silent prayer to myself. That may God remove your share in the world to come for embarrassing me like this. And it's explicit in last week's Torah portion that God hearkens to the prayers of the widows and the orphans even more than regular people. So as I grew up and realized that all you had was a quite human response to a jarring scream, I felt bad that I prayed this, and I was concerned that God would listen to my cries and remove your rewards in the world to come. And that was always bothering me. I later got married to a righteous Chassidic man, and I conveyed to him my anxiety that I had somehow had removed the world to come from A, the greatest Jewish leader of that generation, and B, somebody that had performed a great personal service to me when I was quite vulnerable as an orphan. And we together prayed to Hashem to have the opportunity to rectify this. Finally, we came upon an idea. It says in the good books that a Shabbat well celebrated is similar to the spiritual high of the world to come. So we figured if we would just remove a properly celebrated Shabbat just once from your life, that would be a fulfillment of that prayer that you should have the world to come removed from you. And sure enough, we saw you arrive, knocking at our door, totally lost, presenting us with an opportunity to completely sabotage a Shabbat for you. So now that my anxiety is removed and you see us as we truly are, please come and celebrate a real Shabbat with us. From that tiny hut, the Baal Shem Tov and the three Davids, and this man whom they thought was a ruffian, and this elegant woman make their way to their actual home and celebrate a beautiful Shabbat filled with song and camaraderie. Like all good Hasidic stories, two major lessons. First of all, we have to cherish the Shabbat for the heavenly gift it is. And second of all, we must be extra cautious not to offend, even for a short time, anybody, and especially the very vulnerable.